everyone! Welcome to the Jayda InStitches show and welcome to our 2023 Fair Isle style calendar blanket. This year we will be borrowing from the Fair Isle knitting tradition of carrying a couple of colors of yarn and making simple mirror image geometric shapes. We are going to begin January this year with snowflakes. This year we'll be using graphs, and we'll be using in particular a double crochet graph. So our graph is in the style of a 1:2 ratio. For more information on that, you can check out the little tutorial we did at the beginning of the week. We'll link that down below. As such, this year our calendar blanket videos are going to look a little different. We will always have the graph we're using in the top right corner, so at any time you can pause the video and just study the graph if you're comfortable reading the graphs, or you can listen as we go through each row with the row counts. I'll be talking about when to change colors and how to change colors and the counts for each row. So there's two ways to use our tutorials this year. And a really great way to help support our show is to pop into our Etsy shop and pick up the pattern. We will have the patterns for each of the installments for the calendar blanket available in our shop the same day the tutorials go up, and they will also have the written directions and the graph included in them. And now just a handful of fun facts before we jump into the tutorial. This kind of work is great. There's no right or wrong side to your blanket. And you can make either side the right side or the wrong side if you feel like one side looks better than the other. This is all to do with how we read the graph and weaving in tails. There's a lot of tails to weave in this year, but you can do them all at the end or you can do them as you go. As you can see, I've woven in my tails for January. And if any of you at any time would like to see a much more in-depth video on how I'm weaving in my tails this year, let me know and we will create a simple little quick fix tutorial very specifically on just how I'm weaving in tails for the calendar blanket. This year's blanket is built all in one go, so every month we'll be building onto the existing strip, so there is no join video this year, only a border video, which of course will be 11 months from now. Somehow I have a feeling in 11 months I'll be saying it came up quicker than I thought, but at least there's no joining this year. So kind of like how we did the Victorian Stitch Sampler, we'll just be adding to the blanket each month. And one more thing. We'll be using spools this year. We've talked a bit about spools all week here on the channel. We showed you a video on how you can make your own spools, and today I'll be showing you some nice sort of best practices on using the spools, how to make sure they're always on the right side of your blanket, and that's a real big key to making your graph work look as tidy and neat as, say, this does. You want to pay very close attention to your spools, what side of the blanket they're on, keeping them on the right side of the blanket, and we'll have some helpful tips throughout the video for you on that. So let's grab our hooks, we will grab our yarn, we will head on over to the craft table, and we will start to stitch up the 2023 Fair Isle style calendar blanket together. I'm using size 4 medium weight 100% acrylic yarn for this year's blanket. For my light color, I'm going to need around 80 to 85 yards for the January strip. That's just because there's an extra row in the January strip versus the other strips in this year's blanket. I also need 6 spools, and I've loaded my spools with 11 yards of my dark color per spool. So each spool has the same amount of yarn on it, and between 11 and 12 yards is probably what you need for each snowflake in the graph, depending on how tight your tension is. So if you're a looser crocheter, you might want maybe 12 yards. If you're tighter, 11 should be fine. You want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and the hook we're using for the entire year is a size 5.5 millimeter, also known as an I or a 9 in the US. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. I've got a little rough graph here of the graph we're going to be following today, and you're going to see your graph right here in the top right hand corner. We're also going to indicate what row we're on and what stitch we're on as we go. Now this graph is based on a 20 stitch count, so you can actually make your blanket any multiple of 20 stitches. So if you wanted to make it wider, you could add more graph to it. So every 20 stitches is one full repeat of the graph. And if you're using the DK weight size 3-ish yarn, then you might want to add one more graph to the length, or the width I should say, of your blanket. So an additional 20 stitches over and above our foundation row. And then this one, the January one, is 11 rows tall just because we're adding in an extra row here at the bottom. All the other months will be 10 rows tall. So 20 stitches across, usually 10 rows tall, but January we have an extra row. Every month this year, you can do a little sampler of the graph to kind of get comfortable with the way things feel and how the graph looks. It's also a fun way to experiment with colors. So you're going to see my samples throughout the year. This is my January sampler. I sort of reversed the light and dark colors. I did the snowflake in pink and the background in blue, as opposed to, say, doing the background in pink and the snowflake in blue, just because I thought it would be fun to sort of see what these two different colors look like, and I also like using up my scraps. Now, the other fun thing about some of these little square samplers is that if you do them all in the same size of weight yarn, then you can stitch them all together at the end of the year and have a really cool scarf. Just saying, that's my plan. Anyway, that's the little sampler for January. Feel free to do one if you're not doing the whole blanket, or if you're not sure about your colors, then definitely I recommend doing a sampler to start. We are going to begin with our foundation row. We are going to begin on the first row of the graph. The first row of the graph is all white stitches. Now, as I said before, the graph is worked over 20 stitches. We want a total of 120 stitches for our foundation row, plus 1 for the turning chain. So 121 chains is what we're going to chain for our foundation row. But every 20 chains represents a repeat of that graph. So we will be repeating the graph 6 times. If you are going to do it more, then you want to add an additional 20 chains. So 121 chains for the foundation chain row. For every graph you want to repeat, you would add an extra 20 chains to your foundation chain row. Once you have 121 chains, or any multiple of 20 chains plus 1 extra, count them up, make sure you've got 121. We are going to start by skipping the first 2 chains, finding the third one, and double crocheting into it. You are going to double crochet into every other chain all the way across. So skip the first 2 chains, double crochet into the third, double crochet into every single chain all the way across. Every 20 stitches on the graph of row 1 is represented by a white block. So every single stitch across row 1 is white. So there's no color changing in row 1. Those are the first 20 stitches across my foundation chain row. So this is the first 20 stitches complete of row 1. The chain 2 at the beginning counts as a double crochet. So every row will begin with a chain 2, and that chain 2 will count as a double crochet. And here's how it relates to our graph. Our graph is 20 stitches across. Each of those sort of spaces represents a stitch, and that is how you read it. So there are 20 double crochet. Those 20 double crochet are represented by those 20 stitches across row 1, and then it repeats. So it's kind of like going 20, and then like a typewriter, you're kind of going back to the beginning and you're repeating it again. So this is how you constantly repeat a graph. We're going to repeat the graph 6 times, so we are doing all 20 of these stitches 6 times. So you repeat, you do 1 through 20, and then you go back and you repeat it 1 through 20. Back and repeat 1 through 20. And you're going to do that all the way across. And because it's just a plain white, there's no color changing, it's pretty easy. You're just, the other way to look at it is to just double crochet with color A, or the white or light color, in every single stitch all the way across. And that's how you read row 1 of the graph. And I'll see you at the end of row 1. At the end of row 1, you'll have 120, or a perfect multiple of 20, double crochet stitches. So count them up, you should have 120, and that basically translates to having repeated row 1 of our graph 6 times in total. So 6 times 20 is 120. That's row 1 complete. We are now going to change to row 2. Every row begins with a chain 2. We turn our work. We skip that first stitch because the chain 2, counting as a double crochet, already uses it. And we are going to now start color changing this row. So the first 9 stitches of our little graph are white, or color A. So this would be a chain 2 if you're reading right-handed,
this would be your chain 2. I should say this is your chain 2 if you're right-handed. This is your chain 2 if you're left-handed. And we run the first 9 stitches in white or light color, then we switch to our dark color. So the first 9 stitches of row 2 are light, so that's stitch number 1, 2, there's my first 8 stitches. I'm about to start the 9th stitch in the light or white color. Remember, just before we change colors, we want to not complete that row or that last stitch, and you want to grab your first spool of color. You can just loop in your yarn if you want to change colors that way, but I like to start with a slip knot just so I know that that's not going to come undone on me. And then we complete that last stitch in the light color with the color change. And that way the top of our next stitch will have the right color on it. We're going to keep our spool color to the front. We're going to work over top of color A. I'm not going to weave in my tails as I go. I'm going to worry about that later. And the next 2 stitches in our graph are colored. So dark color, we double crochet twice. But because this is the stitch just before the color change, you only complete the first half. Keep that yarn to the front of the color, and then you're going to complete it with the light color. Then there's 9 more stitches in our graph of the light color, and that completes the first 20 stitches of the graph, and then we will repeat it again. Now before we move on, I like to do this with my little spools. I kind of wrap it up, maybe just a little bit so that it dangles, and then to keep it from going anywhere, I just lock that yarn back into place so that as I'm working, it'll just stay there and it won't unravel on me. And this helps keep things from getting tangled. I'm going to drop that. I'm going to finish the second row of the graph for the first repeat, which is the first 20 stitches. There is the first repeat of the graph of row 2 complete. So there's 9 stitches in light, 2 stitches in dark, 9 stitches in light. And it reads like this: 9, 2, 9. Now we repeat row 2 from the beginning of the graph all over again. 9 in light, 2 in dark, 9 in light. And you will repeat this all the way across 6 times total. So 9 light, 2 dark, 9 light. 9 light, 2 dark, 9 light. 9 light, 2 dark, 9 light. Just like that all the way across. And every time you get to start another graph color change, you're going to grab another one of your little spools. So I'll see you in 9 light double crochet, and we'll tie in our next spool. I'm starting my 9th and the last color in, or the last stitch in light before the color change, so I only work the first half. Grab my second spool. I'm going to start with a little slip knot. Also keeping this on the front of my work. I'm going to finish that stitch. I'm going to put that little tail to the back. I'm going to work over top of my light yarn, so I'm holding that along the top of my work. I'm going to work 2 stitches with the dark color. I work the first half of the second stitch with the dark color, then I drop it, bring it to the front, and I complete with the light color because that's it. There's only 2 stitches. That will complete in the right color, and then this will set me up to have the right color running across the top of my next stitches. Before I leave, I'm just going to wind this up a little bit and lock it into place so that it doesn't want to dangle. And that way, as I'm going, my little spools won't get tangled. If you're working flat against your desk, you can have an even shorter leash on your spool, and that might be really handy, especially if you're new to color changing. I'm kind of working in the air here so you can sort of see what I'm doing, but I will be working closer to my table as I go forward. Then you complete the second part of that row 2 graph repeat with 9 more light stitches. That completes the second repeat of the graph, and then you start again. 9 light, 2 dark, 9 light, 2 dark. And every time you get to the 2 dark, you want to tie in one of your 6 little spools. You should have something that looks like this now. There's 9 white or light, 2 dark, and then 9 to finish the graph, and then the graph starts all over again for row 2. 9, 2, 9, 9, 2, 9, and so on and so on. You'll have all 6 of your little spools tied in. The last stitch, or the last stitch, number 20 of the graph, is always worked into the top of the chain 2. So you find the top of the chain 2, because the chain 2 counts as a double crochet. Don't skip it. And then it's easy when you start changing colors to count your stitches. You should have 9, 2, and then 18, 2, 18, 2, all the way across, because we're repeating that graph 6 times in total. So you've got all of your little spools out the front. Take a moment to make sure that you've kind of tacked them all, so that if you had to pick it up or move it, they're just going to dangle there and they're not going to get all twisted and tied up on you. I like to try and keep them sort of all sitting on my work table, and then when I carefully turn the blanket, so for row 3 we chain 2, you can kind of just grab one end and pull it, and that should keep them from getting tangled on you. And now they should all be sort of hanging out on this side of your work. So all the way to the front or to the back of your work, and here we go. We are now starting row 3. Row 3 starts with 3 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 6 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 3 light, repeat. 3, 2, 2, 6, 2, 2, 3, repeat. Of course, we're going to keep that graph up there so that if you need to pause the video, you can kind of get the numbers into your head. 3, 2, 2, 6, 2, 2, 3, repeat. So that first chain 2 counts as a double crochet. I work the next double crochet completely in the next stitch, and then I start the third stitch in light, but because it's a stitch before color change, I only worked the first half, and I come to my first spool down here. I'm going to unhook it. I'm going to be working over top of my white yarn. Because my spool color is all the way back here, I'm going to grab that color and very gently finish off the double crochet with it. Now it should be not too tight, but just enough that I can kind of work over top of it. I'm going to work over top of my light yarn. I'm also going to work over top of this little stretch of blue, and it'll disappear completely. I'm now going to work 2 dark, or 2 stitches with the blue. I'm partway through my second stitch, so I stop. I'm going to carry the blue now, because I'm going to be working with it further across the part of row 3 of the graph that I need to carry the blue across to. I'm going to work 2 stitches in light, and I'm taking care to work over top of that little stretch of yarn plus the working blue yarn. And you can sort of tug on the yarns as you go. That kind of helps keep them from bunching up. Oops, see, I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to work the first half of that second stitch in light. And now I'm going to carry my light. I'm switching to my dark. I'm still working over top of that little carried bit of yarn. It's good to work nice and slowly when you're getting used to changing color and doing some graft work. There's no rush here. Oops, I want to finish that. There we go. Always look back and see what you're doing. I tug down on the color that I just switched from to sort of tighten up the stitch. I'm going to carry that color now, and I'm going to work 6 in blue. I'm still working over top of that little bit of tail. So here we go. There's the next one. Same thing. I'm going to make sure I grab underneath that little bit of blue so it completely disappears. And it looks like it's disappeared. I might grab the next. So right under that little extra bit of yarn that was carried, and you're still working over top of the color that you're carrying. In this case, it's the light color. And as you work along, it's very good to just sort of stop, pull on the stitches to make sure that you're covering it well. And if you feel like, for example, this looks like it's too exposed, so I'm going to pull out those last 2 stitches, and instead of using that little bit or working over top of that little bit, I'm just going to ignore it. And that way it won't pull my stitches, and I can tug on the color that I'm carrying, and it'll pretty much just disappear. So I'm just going to ignore that little tail for now. Got 2 more, and I start, but don't completely finish, that 6th dark stitch. I still need my blue for a couple stitches over here, so I'm going to switch. I'm now going to work over top of the blue. I'm going to finish off that stitch with the light. I'm going to yank down on the blue a little bit. I'm going to work 2 stitches of the light color, half that one with the light, because I'm switching again to the white color. So I drop the white, but I'm going to work over top of it, finish that stitch with the blue, and work 2 stitches with the blue, and before I finish off that stitch, I'm going to drop the blue and finish it with the white. Now that 2 break 6 break 2, so that work with the dark blue or the dark color is it for that spool. So I'm going to find the spool that I'm working with. Here it is here. I'm going to, before I might rewind a little bit of this here. Before I carry on, I'm going to rewind it so that it doesn't want to unravel on me. There, rewound that so it's a little tighter. There we go. Clip it so that it doesn't want to move. And then I can continue to finish row 3 of the graph. There were 3 more stitches in light or white to finish off row 3 of the graph. I'm not carrying anything anymore because those was that, or I should say, that was the extent of the graph use of the spool color. So if I switch back here to my graph, here we are in row 3, 3 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 6 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 3 light. That's the 20 stitches across row 3 for the graph, and then we start to repeat again. 3 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 6 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 3 light, and so on. So I've just finished those 20 stitches, 3, 2, 2, 6, 2, 2, 3, and now I start again. 3 double crochet in light, and then I switch to my second spool, and I start the row 3 color changing pattern all over again. At the end of row 3 of the blanket, and you've repeated row 3 of the graph 6 times in total, make sure that all of your little spools are all tucked up again so that they're not going to unwind on you. And remember that that last double crochet is always worked into the top of the chain 2 turning. And so far, you've got the bottom part of a snowflake happening. Row 4, we are now moving on to row 4. The row 4 count is, we are kind of moving back in this direction, so right-handed or right to left, left-handed or left to right. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 light, then 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 5 light. Then it repeats. 5 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 5 light, and so on. Chain 2 to begin. That chain 2 counts as a double crochet. We are going to slowly roll our blanket around. So now all of our spools are facing us again. They're on the front of the blanket. We've got 5 double crochets in the light to do. So we'll start. That's 1. The first chain 2 counts as the double crochet. Now, we are going to be crocheting over top of those 2 darks, so you're going to want to carry that color a little bit. So I like to make sure that I'm going to unwind my bobble or bobbin spool ready to use. I'm going to bring my yarn up a little bit just so I don't end up with a cross. So I'm going to slip it underneath my hook, and that way it just kind of gets pulled up into the stitch and disappears. And here is my 5th light. I'm only going to work the first bit. I'm going to switch now to the blue, and I'm going to work over top of the light. I want 2 dark, work the first half of that second blue one, and I switch back to light. Now I'm carrying the blue. I work 2 light stitches. I'm going to pull on my blue a little bit just so that I don't have any really obvious color carrying. I'm going to switch back to blue. Pull on that white one a little bit. Now I'm carrying my white yarn. I'm going to carry the blue. Switch back to white. I'm carrying the blue. So far so good. I'm carrying the white, so I'm just going to tug on the white a little bit. And then I've got 2 blue left. So that is it. I worked the last half of that last stitch, or I should say the first half of the last stitch with the blue. Switch back to white, and that is it for the color change for that part of the graph of row 4. So I'm going to tie up my spool so it doesn't want to unwind on me. Then there are 5 light stitches to finish the row. So I want to make sure I jump to the next one. And there we go. So 5 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 5 light. That completes the 4th row of the graph, and now I repeat the 4th row of the graph another 5 times. 5 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 5 light, and so on all the way across. And of course, as I get to the second graph repeat, I'm going to use my second spool, and so on all the way across. That's row 4 completed. So you've got 6 repeats of row 4 of the graph. Every single one of your little blue or dark colored areas should be identical to the one before it. And all of your spools should be on this side, so the side facing you of the blanket. Remember that last double crochet goes into the top of the chain 2. Let's start row 5. We're going to chain 2. That counts as a double crochet. We are going to carefully spin our work. So now all of our spools are on the side away from you. And here we go. Row 5 is 3 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 6 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 3 light. It's a repeat basically of row number 3. So row 5 is pretty much identical to row 3. So as you're working along now, you basically want to line up your blue or dark stitches with the dark stitches from 2 rows before. So not the row that you're working across, but row 3 here. So not row 4, row 3. It'll be identical to this one. So 3, 2, 2, 6, 2, 2, 3, and then you start all over again. 3, 2, etc. So that's the first double crochet, technically, with the chain 2. 1, 2, 3. I start that one. I grab my spool, and I am doing the same thing. I've got to bring it back, so I'm going to make a nice kind of easygoing finish to that stitch to make sure I've got enough give that I can work over top of it. I'm going to work 2 double crochets over top of both my white and that little carried bit of blue. And I want to make sure I get that blue, so I slip it underneath the stitch and I get the blue carry. There we go. Before I finish that, I'm going to carry the blue. So that's the first 2. See how they're directly in alignment with the 2 from the row 2 previous? So this is, then we're going to switch to 2 white. So we're going to carry that blue. Switch back to the blue. We're going to carry the light color, and now we're working 6 blue. Remember, it's identical to this row, not number 4, but number 3. And you can sort of tell that you're doing the right thing by stopping every once in a while. I like to pull on my carried color just to kind of tighten things up. That way you can see that you can't really see the carried colors. So if you're sort of tightening as you go, you won't see the carried colors, and then making sure that everything in row 5 is mirroring the identical stitchery and color changing of row 3. Switching back to light, carrying the blue, switching back to blue, carrying the white, and switching back to light again. All of those blue stitches are now in alignment with row 3 stitches. So we've got the bottom half of a snowflake now. That's it for the blue for this chunk of the graph. So I can pick up my spool, wind it up, tuck my little tail in, and then I can continue with the remaining stitches in row 5. There are 3 light, or in my case, white stitches. There we go. And then the pattern starts all over again. 3 white, 2 blue, 2 white, 6 blue, 2 white, 2 blue, 3 white. Over and over and over. And I'm going to repeat that 5 more times. That's row 5 of the graph repeated 6 times. Row 5 is an absolute mirror image of row 3. So double check, make sure that nothing looks wrong. All of your spools should be still facing away from you. We're going to chain 2 to begin row 6. We're going to carefully spin our blanket, and now all of our spools are facing us again. Row 6 has the most blue used, or the most dark color. So the first stitch, so right-handed, left-handed, it's your chain 2. You're going to go directly into blue, and you're going to make 8 blue stitches carrying the white, 2 white in the very middle, 8 blue carrying the white, and then 1 white stitch to finish. And then you're going to repeat that again 6 times. So 1 white, 8 blue, 2 white, 8 blue, 1 white. This is the only time that we don't worry so much about changing colors for the top of a stitch. So you just chain your 2 with your white color, and then we start directly into carrying the white and using the dark blue. So we're going to skip that first stitch because it's used. We're going to double crochet into the next stitch. We're carrying the white color, double crochet. You're going to tighten up on that white. Just going to put my blue over here while I work over top of my white. So that's my first blue stitch. If I have a little bit of carry color, always look for that carry color. Make sure I'm working over top of it so it disappears. I can tug on my white or the carried color while I'm working. So there's my first 4 blue stitches, and again we're just going to ignore the little chain 2 and the color change at the edge. I might just pull back on that white a little bit just so I don't, there we go, don't want my chain 2 to kind of get too crushed. There's a lot of little fiddling you can do as you work when you're carrying colors, and that's why it's good to not work too quickly. Keep an eye on your spools, you don't want them to get tangled. Consistently count. It's the fun part about graph work, is that you get to sort of see the image developing as you work. So there's 8 blue. Well, that means that in my last blue stitch, I want to only work the first half of it. So 8 blue stitches. Pick up my white. Now I'm carrying the blue for just a couple stitches. I'm going to tug on my blue a little bit. Work 2 white double crochet. I'm going to switch back to blue. And then I'm going to carry my white. So don't want to tangle things here. I'm carrying my white. I'm working over top of it with the blue. I'm working 8 blue double crochet stitches. You can see there's that whole arm of the snowflake showing up there. That's stitch number 8. I'm going to work the first half of it, drop the blue completely, finish with the white, and then I have one more white stitch, and that finishes row 6 of the graph. I'm now going to repeat that: 1 white, 8 blue, 2 white, 8 blue, 1 white, 6 more times. We've got half a snowflake made. That is row 6 finished. We are halfway through our snowflake, and since we're halfway through the snowflake, I'm going to take a moment to just talk about a couple more technique things you might want to consider. First of all of our spools should be still facing us on this side of the blanket. If you find at the end of a row, when you start a row, if they're all on this side, they should be all on this side when you finish the row, and then we turn it, and if they're all on that side of the row, when you finish it, they should still be on that side of the row until you turn it. So if you get to the end of a sort of a graph repeat and you realize, oops, like your spool's on the other side of the blanket than it should be, and maybe you've continued to work a little ways and you think, oh, and you don't want to take it out, you don't have to. Just unwind that spool completely, plunk your hook right through where the yarn finished, kind of hook it and pull it back out to this side, pull the whole thing through, and then rewind up your spool on the correct side of your blanket. So no need to take out stitches, and it's very important that you keep the spools on the side that they're on, because that's what keeps that neat and tidy looking. You won't end up with any like sort of carry color sort of showing through. So this looks pretty neat and tidy. And remember, as you go, you can sort of pull on stitches, just pull on the carrying color to make sure that it's tightening up a little bit, and that way you won't have any colors carrying showing through. And using the lighter color and the darker color usually covers over the light, and if your stitches are nice and close together, the lighter colors carry over the dark, and you really don't see any carriage. It looks good. Okay, let's move on to row 7. Row 7, we begin with a chain 2. We're going to carefully turn our work. All of our spools are now on the other side facing away from us. Row 7 is an exact repeat of row 5, which was an exact repeat of row 3. So 3 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 6 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 3 light, and repeat. So same thing, you want to make sure all of your color changes are in alignment with row 5 and row 3, and that way you know you won't have made any mistakes. We want to look down here to see about where our color is, because our color ends further back than where it's going to change color a couple stitches in. I'm going to unwind that spool now, and I'm going to make sure that I bring it up and work over top of it from behind. So that stitch is already used. I'm going to double crochet into the next stitch, and I'm going to make sure I grab that blue yarn. You see how I've got it up and over my hook so that when I double crochet, I've picked it up, and that way I've picked it up and I'm going to carry it along. So I double crochet to start. I've got 3 lights. Then I can switch to my colored yarn, and I work 2 dark. I work the first half of that second one, change it up. I am carrying the dark color now. Again, I'm repeating row 5, which was the same as row 3. Flip it over, and there shouldn't be any yarn showing over here. If this looks a little loose to you, you can always just kind of tug it into position, and you can work away at tugging all of your little loops. So yarn doesn't necessarily have to stay where it was placed. There, see, it completely disappeared now. So you can stop every so often if you're not sure about having picked up something or worked over top of something else. Just pause as you go, tug on your threads, and everything will fill in quite nicely. There's a little practice, of course, involved if you've never done a lot of color changing or graph work before, but that is the whole point of this blanket. So I'm going to let you do row 7. It's a repeat of row 5, and I'll catch up with you at the end. That's row 7 complete. Once again, row 7 was a repeat of row 5 and row 3. Row 8 is a repeat of row 4. This is row 4 in here. So row 4 starts with 5 white, and then 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 5 white, and repeat. 5 white, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 2 light, 2 dark, 5 white. Remember, if your color changes and your stitches line up with row 4, as you're working across row 8, you'll know that you're doing it correctly. So we pull everything. We're going to chain 2 to begin row 8. We're going to carefully turn our work. All of our spools are now facing us. They're on this side of the blanket. We're going to start with 5 white, so the chain 2 counts as the first one. 2. And because our first blue starts a bit further in, so it's going to be starting here, we want to make sure that we're coloring or carrying that color if we're working over top, like if we have to kind of bring it back to start further along than where it was dropped. So remember that you're always looking for those opportunities to carry the color. Pull up on it, and then change color. We're going to carry the white, work the first 2 blue of the row, keeping the color on the front because that's where the spool is. Carry the color for a couple of stitches, and so on. You want to make sure that it's matching up with row 4. So here's row 4, 5 white, 2 dark, For row 8, same thing, 5 white, 2 dark, 2 light, and it's matching up, it's sitting on top of everything from row 4. So you're going to work away at row 8. Row 8 is identical to row 4, and I will see you at the end. That's row 8 complete. Make sure that your row 8 is in alignment with row 4. So all of your color changes should match up with the row 4. And we are on to row 9. Row 9 will seem very familiar because it is a repeat of row 7, which is a repeat of row 5, which is a repeat of row 3. So here's our row 3, our row 5, our row 7, and we're going to repeat row 9. Row 9 starts with 3 white. So we're going to chain 3. This counts as our first double crochet. We carefully flip our blanket. All of our spools are now on the opposite side, facing away from us. Double crochet into each of the next 2. And our first color change is coming up. So I've got a nice big carry, so I've got a little carry across here. I want to make sure it's loose enough that I can work over top of it. And then, so I'm carrying the white, I'm also working over top of that little bit of blue that I'm carrying. Making sure I'm not splitting it. There we go. So 3 white, 2 dark, matches this one, 3 white, 2 dark. I forgot to change colors. This is why I like to stop frequently. I'm keeping my color on this side. I'm going to carry it, change color. Change color. So my 2 white are in alignment with my other row 3, row 5, row 7, row 9, and you're just going to continue. So it's 3 white, 2 dark, 2 white, 6 dark, 2 white, 2 dark, 3 white, repeat. 3 light, 2 dark, 3 white, 2 dark, 3 white, 6 dark, 2 white, 2 dark, 3 white, repeat. Remember that as long as your row 9 matches your row 7, row 5, and row 3, you'll know you're on the right track. I will see you at the end. That was row 9 complete. We've got 2 more rows left, row 10 and row 11, and they are mirror images of row 2 and row 1. So row 10 is exactly the same as row 2, and that's the row we're about to start. So let's chain 2 to begin row 10. Carefully turn our blankets. All of our spools are now facing us on this side. Chain 2 counts as the first double crochet, and let's pull back our handy little guide here. Just like row 2, row 10 is identical. We start with 9 double crochet stitches, or at least the chain 2, and then 8 more of those, 9 in total. Then 2 dark, and then 9 light. So 9 light, 2 dark, 9 light. Repeat 6 times, and like the previous rows, so long as your row 10, your color changes are in alignment with row 2, you'll know that you're doing it right. I'm going to undo my first spool because we're going to carry that blue for a little while, so that's my first stitch. And here we go. I'm going to start carrying right about here, so I'm going to make sure that my blue yarn is sort of caught by my stitch so that I can start working over top of it. And remember, as you carry a color, you can just stop every so often and tighten up on it. So you see here, you can sort of see that blue popping out, but if I tighten up on it, it all but disappears. So what have I got? 3, 5, 7, number 8, and number 9 is the stitch that I change colors on. I carry the white, I work 2 double crochet in the dark color, finish that second stitch with the white, tighten up, and that is that spool all done. Now I've got more here than I need, that's always a good thing, but I'm just going to tack it up like I did before. I don't have to carry it, I'm pretty much done with that now, and now I'm just going to work my 9 stitches in light and then repeat. 9 light, 2 dark, 9 light, 9 light, 2 dark, 9 light, all the way across. That is row 10 done. We've got one more row left to go. It's row 11 and it is just solid white or light. So you're going to chain 2, turn, and double crochet in every single stitch all the way back. So we're going to carefully turn. We're still always skipping that first stitch. You'll have 120 stitches at the end of every single row. Or if you did a custom number of graphs across, it'll be a perfect multiple of 20. So you'll always have the same stitch count in every row of this entire blanket. So if you're wondering, you shouldn't have more and you shouldn't have less than 120. Double crochet in every single stitch all the way across. I will catch up with you at the end of row 11. And there we are, all done. 11 rows. Each graph is 20 stitches, so we're repeating that graph 6 times, and we've got 6 snowflakes all the way across. Now, I'm going to continue with my white yarn. It will be my light color uniformly throughout. I am not fastening off. If you're scrap busting and you're going to be changing up your 2 colors for the February strip, you can fasten off and change your colors for the next month, and we'll tell you how to do that in February. In the meantime, we've got all of these little tails to weave in. So you don't need a whole lot of tail. If you're using sort of a slippery yarn, then you might want to leave yourself a little bit more tail. But all you want to do is weave your little ends in back and forth. So for example, here's our short tails. You would just grab your yarn needle and weave them in back and forth through similar colored stitches. So blue to blue in this case. For the bits where you haven't knotted off, there are 2 ways you can do this. You can weave them in back and forth if you have a long enough tail, and they should not come out. This is especially true if you're using sort of a grabby yarn, if your stitches are tight. If your stitches are loose or you think you're going to be washing this in the washing machine often and you're nervous about things coming undone, then you're going to make a simple little knot. So you're going to use your yarn needle, thread up your yarn, make a little tiny knot around the closest loop, and then weave in your tails, and you should be fine. And by weaving them in, I mean just find whatever closest stitches of the same color are there. And weave them in. I'm going to weave it down right through these blue stitches down to the bottom of that row. And then I'm just going to weave them in underneath these blue stitches here, back and forth a few times. Sort of the same kind of weaving in technique that we use for most of our projects. Try not to be too tight. And you can do this as you go. I will be doing this as you go, sort of weaving in all my tails, or you can just leave them all out to the end of the blanket and then sort of spend a day in front of the TV weaving in your tails at the end of the project. Try not to make them too tight. You don't want to pull your picture out of alignment. And remember, like the rest of this project, you can kind of fiddle with the individual threads here and there as you go. And of course, we'll be blocking our project at the end as well. So if you feel like there's a little bit of tightness here and there from the color changing, don't worry. We'll be blocking our blankets at the end, and that will make everything lay nice and flat.
And that is January. 6 snowflakes, or more if you decided to add a few more sets of 20 chains to your foundation row. Now, of course, you can make it a little taller too. You could repeat all of those graphs again, so you could have 2 strips of snowflakes if you wanted, or you could just add a few rows of double crochet in between months. That will help elongate your blanket as well. And like I said earlier, if you're not entirely sure you want to do the entire blanket, we will be doing a little sampler every single month, just so you can get an idea of what the square looks like. And I'm going to be making one every month, and I'll probably be stitching them all together. So I'm going to have like a little mini sampler blanket at the end of the year. This is a fun way to experiment with colors and, scrap bust, which is, kind of a fun way to justify using up your yarn. We hope you enjoyed working on the January installment of our 2023 Fair Isle Style calendar blanket along with us this month, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye, everybody!
Hi, everybody! Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.